For 7 years, every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, she prayed the same prayer. Lord, I don't need riches. I don't need fame. I just need one opportunity. She had submitted more than 1,000 job applications. She had attended over 200 interviews. Every single one ended the same way. We'll call you. They never did. Friends told her to lower her expectations. Family members quietly wondered if God had forgotten her. And even she began asking questions she never thought she would ask. Lord, are you still listening? Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, she boarded the wrong bus. She walked into the wrong building. She sat in the wrong waiting room. And she accidentally interrupted a meeting she was never supposed to attend. Everyone thought she had made the biggest mistake of her life. But years later, she would say, that wrong interview was God's perfect appointment. Stay with us, because what happened inside that office changed not only her future, but the lives of hundreds of people she would later help. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We'd love to hear from you. And if this is your first time here, go ahead and subscribe, because this is only the beginning of her story. Her name was Grace Williams, 32 years old, from Youngstown, Ohio. If you looked at her resume, you wouldn't understand why she was still unemployed. A bachelor's degree in business administration, graduated with honors. A stack of certifications she'd paid for out of her own pocket, one after another, hoping each one would finally be the key that turned the lock. 3 years of experience as an administrative coordinator, before the company downsized and let her go along with 40 others. Since then, nothing. Not for lack of trying. Grace was the kind of woman people called steady. She showed up early. She kept her word. At Mount Calvary Baptist Church, she volunteered in the children's ministry every single Sunday, and when the worship leader was out sick, she was the first person the pastor called, because Grace could sing a room back to stillness. She lived with her mother, Eleanor, in a small rented house on the east side of town. Eleanor was 68, diabetic, and 2 years past the point where she should have stopped working the register at the pharmacy. Grace's father had passed when she was 24. Since then it had just been the two of them, and a mountain of student loan debt that grew a little heavier every month it went unpaid. Every morning, before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops on Delmont Street, Grace knelt beside her bed and whispered the same words she'd whispered for 7 years. It was a small prayer. So small it had worn smooth, like a stone turned over in your pocket for far too long. Then she would sit at the kitchen table, open her laptop with its taped-together charger, and search. Administrative assistant, office coordinator, customer service representative, entry-level analyst. She tailored every resume by hand. She wrote a new cover letter every single time, because she refused to let anyone think she didn't care enough to try. And she did get interviews. That was the strange, cruel part of it. She was good enough to get in the room. Hiring managers nodded at her answers. They said things like, "You'd be a great fit here." They shook her hand a little too warmly on the way out the door. And then silence. "We'll call you." Somewhere around her 150th interview, Grace stopped counting the rejections and started counting the silences instead, because at least a rejection was an answer. Silence was worse. Silence made her wonder if she was even real to the people who had sat across from her. She kept hearing one phrase over and over in sermons, in Bible study, in the quiet of her own prayer time. Wait on the Lord. She had it taped above her kitchen sink. Some mornings it comforted her. Other mornings, washing the same 3 dishes she owned, she stared at that verse and thought, I have been waiting 7 years. How long is wait? Lord, if you were watching Grace's life from the outside, you'd ask the same question everyone around her was quietly asking. Why wasn't God opening a door for a woman who had done everything right? She was faithful. She was qualified. She was kind to people who had no reason to be kind back. And still nothing. By the 6th year, the walls of Grace's patience were beginning to crack, even if her voice on Sunday morning never let it show. The rent was overdue for the 2nd month in a row. Her landlord, Mr. Patterson, wasn't an unkind man, but he was a business owner, and business owners have limits. Grace, I like you, he told her on the porch one evening, arms crossed against the October chill. But I can't keep carrying this. 2 weeks later, the electric company sent a shut-off notice. That night, Grace sat at the kitchen table by the light of her phone flashlight, propped up against a mug, filling out yet another job application, because what else was there to do but keep going? Meanwhile, the world outside her window kept moving without her. Her old college roommate posted about a promotion to senior marketing manager. Grace typed, "Congratulations," with a little rocket emoji, and she meant it. And she also felt something in her chest quietly fold in on itself. She watched 23-year-olds, bright and sharp, only 2 years out of school, get hired for positions she had applied to 18 months earlier. She didn't resent them. She just didn't understand what she had done wrong. At Thanksgiving that year, her Uncle Robert, never a man to soften his opinions, said what half the family was already thinking. "Grace, baby, I love you. But maybe you're praying instead of facing reality. You need to take anything, something. Pride doesn't pay bills." It wasn't true. Grace had applied to those jobs too, and been turned away for being overqualified, which felt like its own private cruelty. But the words landed anyway, the way words from family always do, straight past your defenses and into the soft place underneath. That night, for the first time in 7 years, Grace didn't pray her usual prayer. She just sat in the dark on the edge of her bed. "Lord," she finally whispered, "are you still listening?" The silence in that room felt different than it ever had before. Not peaceful, just quiet, like a held breath. Her mother heard her through the thin wall between their rooms. She didn't say anything that night. But the next morning, she pressed a folded $20 bill into Grace's palm. Money Eleanor herself didn't really have to spare, and said only, "Buy yourself something to eat on your way to that interview Thursday. And Grace, I still believe God sees you, even when you can't feel him." Grace nodded, because that's what you do when someone you love says something you're not sure you believe anymore. But she folded that bill into her wallet like it was something sacred. Maybe it was. Thursday came. Grace had an interview scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp, at a logistics firm downtown, for an administrative coordinator position. She had researched the company for 3 nights straight. Her navy blazer hung pressed on the back of her closet door, like a soldier's uniform waiting to be worn one more time. The night before, lying awake, she made herself a quiet promise. The kind of promise you make when you're standing at the very edge of how much more you can carry. "One more interview," she whispered to the ceiling. "Lord, I'll go one more time. If nothing happens, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I can't keep doing this to myself." It wasn't a threat to God. It was closer to surrender. The white flag of a woman who had simply run out of new prayers to pray. She set 2 alarms like she always did. Neither one went off. Her phone, plugged into a wall outlet with a loose connection, had died sometime around 3 in the morning. Grace woke up at 8:12, heart already slamming before her eyes had fully opened. She threw on her blazer, grabbed her folder of resumes and ran, literally ran, 3 blocks to the bus stop, arriving just in time to watch her bus pull away from the curb without her. "No, no, no, no." She stood on the sidewalk, chest heaving, and for one long moment she seriously considered turning around and going home, just calling the interview line and saying something had come up. Giving up, quietly, the exact way she had promised herself she wouldn't. Instead, she saw another bus rounding the corner. Not her usual route. She didn't even check the number. She just ran and climbed on, telling herself she'd figure it out. She'd transfer downtown somehow. She didn't notice until 3 stops later that this bus was heading in the entirely wrong direction, toward the business district on the north side of the city, nowhere near downtown at all. By the time she realized her mistake, it was 8:51. Her interview was at 9. There was no way she was going to make it. Grace sat there with her forehead against the cool bus window and felt something inside her finally give way. Not loudly, just a quiet, exhausted collapse, the kind that only happens after you've been holding a weight for far too long. She got off at the very next stop anyway. She wasn't sure why. Maybe just to stand somewhere still that wasn't a moving bus. She found herself in front of a tall glass building she didn't recognize. The sign above the doors read Harrow Building, and underneath, in smaller letters, Cardwell Group Holdings. She never could explain, afterward, why she walked in. She would only say it felt less like a decision and more like her feet kept moving after the rest of her had already stopped fighting. The lobby was cool and quiet, expensive-looking in a way that made Grace suddenly aware of the scuff on her left shoe. She sat down near the elevators, just to catch her breath, just to be somewhere for a moment before she had to go home and explain, once again, why nothing had worked out. A security guard noticed her folder of resumes and her lack of a badge and approached with polite suspicion. "Ma'am, can I help you? Do you have a meeting scheduled here?" Grace looked up, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she simply told the truth, plainly, without trying to arrange it into something impressive. "Honestly, I have no idea where I am. I missed my bus, got on the wrong one, and I just sat down. I'm sorry. I'll go." But before she could stand, the elevator doors opened behind the guard, and a small group of executives stepped out mid-conversation, clearly headed somewhere important, clearly not expecting to find a stranger sitting in their private lobby. The guard turned, half reaching for Grace's arm to guide her toward the door, and the man at the front of that small group, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, unmistakably the one everyone else deferred to, stopped walking completely. "Wait," he said. "Let her stay a moment. If you've ever waited on God for something that seemed impossible, something you prayed for so long you started to wonder if he'd forgotten you, type 'I'm still believing' in the comments right now. Let's see how many of us are standing in that same waiting room tonight." His name, Grace would soon learn, was Marcus Cardwell, founder and CEO of Cardwell Group Holdings, a company with its name on 4 buildings across 2 states. He hadn't come down to that lobby by accident either. He'd stepped out for a moment of air between meetings, trying to clear his head before he had to walk into a boardroom and sign off on something he didn't want to sign off on. He watched the security guard begin to ease the woman out, and he heard her say, quietly, almost to herself more than to anyone else, "I know I'm in the wrong place. I'm sorry, I really am. But maybe God wanted me here anyway. Maybe this is exactly where I was supposed to end up, even if it makes no sense to anybody looking at me right now." Marcus Cardwell stopped breathing for a second. Nobody in that lobby understood why those particular words hit him the way they did. His assistant, standing beside him, actually turned to check if something was wrong. Because 20 years earlier, in a diner in Pittsburgh, a 24-year-old Marcus, broke, 3 months behind on rent, one bad decision away from losing everything he was trying to build, had said those exact words to a stranger who bought him a cup of coffee and listened to him talk for 2 hours. "I know this isn't where I was supposed to be tonight, but maybe God wanted me here anyway." That stranger turned out to be the man who gave Marcus his first real investment. The entire trajectory of his life had pivoted on a night he wasn't even supposed to be in that diner. He hadn't heard anyone say those words back to him, not once, in 20 years, until this exact moment. "Wait," Marcus said again, holding up a hand to the guard. He turned to Grace, studying her with an intensity that made her want to shrink into the chair. "What's your name?" "Grace. Grace Williams." "I'm so sorry. I really am about to leave." "What did you just say? About God wanting you here?" Grace flushed, embarrassed, certain she'd offended some important man in some important building. I've been praying for a job for 7 years, sir. I got on the wrong bus this morning. I missed the interview I actually had. I don't even know what building this is. I was just trying to catch my breath before I figured out how to get home." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, his assistant checked her watch. The board was waiting upstairs, waiting on him to walk in and give the final word on a decision that had already cost him 3 sleepless nights. "Come upstairs," Marcus said finally. Sir, I don't have an interview with your company. I don't even know what your company does." "I know," he said. "Come upstairs anyway." Grace sat in a conference room on the 14th floor, hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale, surrounded by 6 executives who had absolutely no idea why she was there. If she was honest, neither did she. Marcus Cardwell sat at the head of the table and finally explained. I want to be honest with you, Ms. Williams, since you were honest with me downstairs. This isn't an interview. This was supposed to be a meeting about whether to shut down one of our divisions. He nodded toward a folder on the table. Cardwell Community Works, a small, underperforming branch of the company that funded job placement and vocational training programs in struggling neighborhoods across 3 cities. It had never turned a real profit. The board had been recommending its closure for 2 fiscal quarters running. 3 people in this room, Marcus continued, have spent the last 2 months building the case for why we should shut it down. And the numbers don't lie. They're right. Financially, it doesn't make sense. He looked at Grace. But every single person that division has ever helped walked in feeling exactly the way you just described downstairs. Overlooked. Forgotten. Wondering if anybody up here even knew they existed. He leaned forward. Tell me about your 7 years. Don't sell yourself to me. Just tell me the truth. So Grace did. She told him about the 1,000 applications. The 200 interviews that ended in silence. The mother who had handed her a $20 bill she couldn't spare. The uncle who had told her that pride doesn't pay bills. The prayer she had prayed every morning at 6 o'clock for 7 straight years. Worn smooth as a stone. She told him about missing the bus that morning and getting on the wrong one, and how, sitting in his lobby, she had genuinely believed, for one strange and stubborn moment, that maybe getting lost was somehow still part of a plan she couldn't see. By the time she finished, 2 of the executives in the room weren't looking at their laptops anymore. Marcus Cardwell sat back in his chair. Ms. Williams, I'm not going to offer you the job you almost interviewed for downstairs. I don't even know what that job is. Grace's stomach dropped, bracing for the same ending she had heard 200 times before. I'm offering you something else, Marcus said. I want you to run Cardwell Community Works. Not as an entry-level coordinator. As its director. Rebuild it if you have to. Tell me what people like you actually need to hear when they walk through a door like this one, because clearly none of us in this room know. The room went silent. Grace opened her mouth twice before any words came out. Sir, I've never run anything like that. I don't have that kind of experience. No, Marcus said. But you have 7 years of experience being exactly the person that division exists to help. In this case, that might be the only qualification that matters. 5 years later, the Cardwell Community Works office wasn't on the 14th floor anymore. Grace had insisted on moving it to a storefront on the east side. 3 blocks from the house she had once shared with her mother. Close enough that the people who needed it most didn't need to catch a bus at all to reach it. The walls were lined with photographs. A young man named Terrell, who had come in after 18 months of unemployment, now stood grinning in scrubs, 3 months into his nursing career. A woman named Priscilla, a single mother of 2, holding a certificate from a paralegal training program Grace had personally fought to fund. Dozens more. Hundreds by now. Grace stood in front of a room of 40 job seekers on a Tuesday morning. The same day of the week, though she never mentioned that part out loud, holding a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. I want to tell you something I didn't understand for 7 years, she said, and the room quieted. I thought God had closed every door in front of me. Every single one. 1,000 applications. 200 interviews. 7 years of praying the same prayer every morning and watching absolutely nothing change. She set the mug down. He wasn't closing them. He was leading me to the right one. And I promise you, the door you're waiting on right now might not look anything like what you expect. Mine didn't. Mine looked like a wrong bus, and a missed interview, and a lobby I had no business sitting in. She smiled, eyes bright. Don't you dare give up on the wrong bus. Sometimes it's the only one still headed toward where you're actually supposed to be. A mother opened a job offer letter at her kitchen table, hand pressed to her mouth. Terrell hugged Grace outside the hospital in his white scrubs. A line of new job seekers filed into the storefront office, coffee and folders in hand, the same way Grace once carried hers. Grace stood beside her mother Eleanor, older now but still there, both of them laughing at something off to the side. And Marcus Cardwell, visiting unannounced one afternoon, stood quietly at the back of the room while Grace taught a resume workshop, watching with the expression of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at. Sometimes God's answer isn't delayed because he's saying no. Sometimes he's arranging a meeting you never knew you needed. The wrong bus became the right destination. And friend, if this story blessed you tonight, don't just sit there quietly. Somebody watching right now needs to hear that their delay is not their denial. Somebody scrolling past this video right now is one prayer away from giving up. So before you go, hit that subscribe button, because we have hundreds more stories just like Grace's waiting for you. Stories of ordinary people God met in the middle of their lowest moment. Drop an amen in the comments if you believe God is still working, even when your prayers feel like they're hitting the ceiling. Like this video if you're still believing for your own miracle. And share this with somebody you know is still waiting on their wrong bus to become the right destination. Because your share might be the very thing God uses to answer somebody else's 7-year prayer. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep believing, keep praying, and never, ever stop showing up, even on the days it feels like heaven is silent. God is still listening.